Well, if you are here to learn about feedback and motivation, you're in the right spot. I am excited that you chose to be here with us today. My name is Megan Pollock, and I live in Dallas, Texas, and my company is called Engineer Inclusion, and I'm excited to work with you. It's possible that maybe I met some of you last year. I came out to campus 4 times, I guess, over the course of 19 and 20 to lead some workshops. So if I look familiar to you, hi, it's good to see you back. And so we're going to learn about some different things, but they'll certainly be connected with some of the things that we talked about last year. This is part of a virtual workshop series that your colleagues have planned for you. So today we're going to be talking about feedback and motivation. February 8th, we're going to be talking about bias and how it functions in our brain. On March 18th, we're going to be really diving into understanding how we can improve our lens to better understand race. And on April 12th, we're going to be again sort of looking inward to figure out how do we better know ourselves to be able to provide equitable education for all of our students. All right, so our guiding questions and objectives for today are as follows. We are going to talk a little bit about motivation. So we're going to look at what are some of the sources of motivation. And so at the end of that time, you'll have looked at various sources, and we're going to, within each hour, I'll show you the agenda in a second. We're going to have a little warm up, a little lesson, and some discussion. So every hour we'll be able to do that. The next guiding question is, how does motivation affect learning? And so you'll be able to apply the natural learning process to something that you do in your work. And then the final thing that we're going to sort of pull it all together is, how do you give feedback that boosts motivation? And so you'll be able to, in the end, be able to give that effective feedback that can boost motivation and self-efficacy. After, I don't know, I've lost track of how many months we've been in COVID, but having given lots of workshops, it's my experience that the best way to do this is to have 50-minute segments. And so I will be really diligent at cutting us off at 50 minutes after the hour. So you get a 10-minute break. And so you can plan for that if you need to stretch, get coffee, make your Apple Watch or whatever activity watch happy so you can move around. And then we'll do the same thing for each hour, and then we'll have 4 to 4:30 where we're really sort of tying it all together and making some action plans for that. Does that sound good? Nods, thumbs up, good. We need lots of breaks when we're having these sort of marathon meetings. So I know that a lot of you have already chimed in on the chat with your names, but I would love to know a little bit more about you. So add in your chat, if you've already fixed your name to show who you are, then you're good there. But tell me what your role is, what your institution is, because I think you're from more than BPCC. And why did you choose to come today? So add those thoughts into the chat and give me a little bit of a sense of who's joining us today. Well, to get us started, we are going to do a little bit of an exercise, and it's going to get us sort of thinking about what it is that we're talking about today. And some might call it a bit of a mindfulness exercise. And to me, this is particularly helpful, again, during, I think, sort of these marathon Zoom meetings to kind of help make us present in the moment. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of guide us through just a really short, just sort of like breathing session of where we can focus our attention. But then I'm going to tag onto that some questions about motivation to get your neurons firing and thinking about what it is that we're going to be talking today. And so I want you to be comfortable in this. It's just going to be really easy and fast. But what I want you to do is to do everything you can to shut down all other distractions in this moment. And sit or stand, whatever is most comfortable to you. Put both your feet flat on the ground. I like to place my hands in my laps or palms up. It's just a comfortable feeling for me. Take a second, kind of like shake it out. Roll your neck around, whatever tension's sitting there, see what you can do to kind of release it, and just start kind of breathing in and breathing out kind of deeply. If you want to close your eyes, you can. If you want to just sort of soften your gaze, that works too. But what I want you to do is you're sort of settling in this position. Just take some deep breaths with me. We're going to breathe in really deep through our nose and out through our mouth. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Let's do 2 more. In through our nose, out through your mouth. In through your nose and out through your mouth. Now keep breathing, please, but I'm going to give you some prompts to think about. I want you to think of a time when you learned something new as an adult. Think of something that you learned. What motivated you to learn it? Think of something else that you learned as an adult. What motivated you to learn that task? What did it feel like when you started to learn something new? What did it feel like? All right, let's come back together. And what I want to invite you to do now is to share something that you learned in the chat. If you are willing to share with the group and have a little bit of a instructive conversation with me, you can raise your hand and then I can call you sort of on to talk about this. But I want to encourage all of you to add something in the chat. Share something that you learned as an adult and describe what motivated you to learn it. So Bo says how to use GPS or GIS. Okay. How to learn how to grill chicken, started a diet. Ham radio. Oh, my dad would love that. My dad's like super into ham radio. Joy says that they learned how to advise students. Motivation was to be able to help them as much as possible. Good. Remodel your kitchen. Felt like a creative process. Bo's sharing his call letters. I assume that's what you're doing. How to use Qless to help advise students. I don't know what that one is, but okay. Virtual teaching, you're right, Cookie. It is hard to do, especially to really pivot and have, create the inclusive learning environments that we intend to create. Y'all are some handy people. We got lots of home improvement folks. Monica said you're using Edgar for federal grants. Maybe you can teach me some of that. Learning how to build an online Canvas course, good. How to put together a bookshelf, nice. Using new workforce. So I want to hear a little bit more of like what motivated you, right? So some of you are saying because you wanted to help your students, maybe because you wanted to have a, more helpful kitchen, perhaps. Speaking Spanish. Laura, what are you learning to use to speak Spanish? Are you using one of the apps or taking a class? Oh, how to use a Cricut machine. Yeah, that's on my wish list. Awesome. So I'd love it if somebody who has shared would be willing to raise your hand and let me have a little bit of conversation with you to kind of tease out some of the themes that we're going to be bridging today. You can use that raising your hand feature on the reaction bar. So find the 3 dots, or if you're showing me your camera, you can wave at me. Anybody willing to chat with me? Oh, Ray, all right. So Ray, you can unmute. Thanks, Ray. So Ray, what was it that you learned how to do as an adult?
Well, I actually learned to build a Canvas course here last March, and it was absolutely necessary for education and my courses, and I really wanted it to be effective. My classes are performance-based, acting, directing, that sort of thing, and it seemed like at first glance to be an impossibility. I still don't think it's the best possible way to instruct in those fields, but it's certainly doable. And you learned also, I learned to direct plays in a safe online environment, things I'd never thought of doing before.
Yeah, so clearly part of your motivation was like global pandemic, had to figure something out, right? So I get that motivation. But you, I assume, made a choice to develop this Canvas course rather than perhaps some other maybe less effective tool. What was it that really motivated you to choose a technical tool that was outside your normal skill set?
Well, I think it was the tool that was available.
Okay.
There was not much choice in it in terms of my preference. Now, in terms of the online or the virtual performances, directing plays online, and also finding ways for my students to direct in an online environment, I think that became more personalized, and it was more born of a motivation to keep students not only engaged, but to also uh, make them feel that they've actually accomplished something by being involved in those processes. It's one thing to take an acting course; it's another to be on stage. And if I can provide that on stage experience, although virtual in a number of instances, then I feel like I've accomplished the goals of the program.
Good. So let me ask another question. What did it feel like when you got the course on Canvas built and you started helping these students? Like, what did that feel like for you as an educator?
Well, I felt great. For one thing, I had accomplished my goal of building a successful course, and just in another way, it's always great to do something that you set out to do that you're not sure you've ever experienced it before, so you don't know how successful you're going to be.
Yeah.
And I could have been more successful in many ways, I'm sure, but I felt like I had accomplished something for myself as well.
Now, Ray, did you do this all by yourself, or did you ask anybody for help? Did
Oh
you
no,
watch any?
I had lots of help, and as a
Lots of help.
dean, I have access to a lot of people's courses, so that helped a lot. Yes.
Awesome. Ray, thanks so much for this. So I might be linking back to your story as I
Sure.
go through the lesson here. So thank you so much. All right. So let's do a little bit of a lesson here, right? So that's the sort of flow that we're going to do each hour. We're going to do a warm-up activity, a little lesson, and then we'll go into an activity and discussion. And so I want to introduce to you 3 sources of motivation. Motivation is very complex. So let me first say that. And there are many sources and ways in which our motivation is formed. We're going to talk today about 3. And so we're going to talk a little bit about self-efficacy and mindset. We're not going to go really deep into these topics because those are workshops in and of themselves, but we're going to understand a little bit about those constructs and how it drives us. So we're going to do that first, and then the next section is we're going to be talking about sort of the inborn motivation system that's part of the function of our brain. So self-efficacy is a belief in oneself that you can accomplish a task. It answers the question, can I do this? And so self-efficacy is important because high self-efficacy predicts academic achievement, where high self-esteem, which is often confused with, does not. So again, high self-efficacy is very different than self-esteem. Self-esteem answers the question, how do I feel about myself? You could have a really low self-esteem, but a high self-efficacy, and that's going to predict your achievement rather than your self-esteem. There are some other self-constructs like self-regulation and self-concept. Again, those are different than self-efficacy. And so when you have a high self-efficacy, when your students have a high self-efficacy, they're more likely to have greater achievement, interest, motivation, engagement, persistence, performance. Raise your hand if these are things that you want from your students, right? Like, we want our students to have all of these things. We want them to be interested. We want them to be engaged and persist. However, when a student has a low self-efficacy, they are more likely to doubt, fear, and avoid tasks. Now, what's critical about students or people in any instance, whether you have a high or low self-efficacy, is they're reciprocal. So if you get into a place of having a high self-efficacy, you're more likely to adopt more and more challenging goals. Whereas if you sort of sit in the sort of quagmire of low self-efficacy, you're more likely to doubt and fear different kinds of tasks. And so I like to use imagery of mountains because it's also, you can correlate things. Well, if I did that, maybe I can do this. If I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, then I can probably climb at Mount Everest, right? So you're, setting yourself for each kind of new goal. Now, I love the little engine that could. And so this is a good example of self-efficacy, right? So the whole little story is like, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And so when we hear that language from our students of like, I think I can, or I think I can't, they're tapping right into that self-efficacy, their belief that they can do a task. And again, this is a really big predictor of academic achievement. And so how do we develop self-efficacy? There are 4 sources of self-efficacy. The first source is mastery experiences. These are previous experiences and performance that suggest that you could do the next task. So something like a sort of formula for this would be, I did X task, therefore I can do, Y more challenging task. I ran a 5K, therefore I think I can run a 10K. I wrote a master's thesis, therefore I think I can do a dissertation. I remodeled my bathroom, therefore I think I can remodel my kitchen. I built a Canvas course for acting and directing, therefore I think I can build an online program for acting and directing, right? So it's, I did this, therefore I think I can do that. I learned Algebra 1, therefore I think I can learn Algebra 2. The next source of self-efficacy are vicarious experiences. This is observation of models. So that could mean role models. So people who you can look up to and say, well, they did it, therefore I think I can do it. But it's also the way in which we model and how we teach. So for, if you as an educator, so I'll call on Ray again. So Ray, as teaching acting and directing, you're likely always trying to model the kinds of positive directing skills that you want your students to model, right? Like it would be ineffective if we're modeling something different than what we're trying to teach. It also means that when you're trying to teach students how to do a new task, that you use a sort of modeling approach of showing them how to do it and then walking them through that process. So the formula for vicarious experiences is because so-and-so did X, therefore I think I can do Y, right? Because my aunt got a PhD in engineering, therefore I think I can get a PhD in engineering. Because my mom learned how to cook on her own, I can learn how to cook on my own. Because my dad remodeled the kitchen, therefore I think so you get the thing. They did it, therefore I think I can do it. The next source of self-efficacy is social persuasion. And we're going to be spending most of our time here around today around this sort of notion of persuasion, because it's feedback. It's the support from others. And so the formula here is because X said Y, therefore I think I can do Z. So because my teacher said that they thought I would be a great speaker, therefore I think I can be a great speaker. Because my boss told me I was really good at developing curriculum, therefore I think I'm really good at developing curriculum and can do this task, right? And so again, it's because someone said X, therefore I think I can do Y. And then the last source of self-efficacy, which is a little outside the scope of what we're going to talk about today, are emotional and physiological cues. So these are your effective physical, body reactions that people can interpret as a sign of your ability. So examples of physiological reactions or cues would be like butterflies in your stomach, or if you get like really flushed when you're going to speak, or maybe you start sweating, like those are physiological reactions. Emotional reactions would be just like straight up anxiety, nerves. And so the difference here is if I relate that emotional or physiological cue to my ability to do a task, it lowers my self-efficacy. So the thing is to separate the two. So just like when we started with the mindfulness exercise, that's a great way to help your students sort of separate some of those physiological and emotional cues by really, really brief things to help them be more present in the moment and sort of separate some of the anxieties and things that they're feeling. Now, the next construct that we're going to look at, and I have all of this, everything I've just said typed up in a really easy way for you to copy and paste into your notes. So if you're taking notes, good, but I do have the highlights available to you. So the next is mindset. And so mindset is a self-perception that people hold about themselves, which is how affects how they approach tasks. So it answers the question, can I improve with effort? Can I improve with effort? Now, Dr. Carol Dweck, she's come out with a construct that's been some time now, looking at this from two different ways, fixed mindset and growth mindset. This has been the buzzword in education for the last few years, so you've likely heard about this. Just like self-efficacy has been around since the late 70s when Albert Bandura initially published it. And again, the goal today is not to dig really deep into these, but it's to look at this and figure out how is motivation stemming from this. So a fixed mindset is the belief that your intelligence, your ability, your personality are static, that nothing can be done to change it. Growth mindset is the belief that your intelligence, your ability, your personality or who you are, it can be developed and changed or improved with effort. So again, if I am who I am, or I can do something with this through some effort. So we're going to talk about in your small groups here, I'm going to give you some strategies, and then we're going to go into small groups, and you're going to be discussing how you see some of these things manifest in the classroom. So I've got 6 strategies for boosting self-efficacy and mindset. And then we're going to spend, again, the rest of the time talking about the learning process and feedback and how it all ties together. So your first strategy for your students is to help them break down the task. And sort of tied to that is setting small, proximal, manageable goals. I was giving a talk yesterday on Facebook Live for a colleague that I wrote an article for her magazine. And, we were talking about the fact that, so many people haven't developed a skill set yet of how to break it down a task. And I was sharing with her that my 3rd grade teacher, Ms. Doreen Babcock, gave me probably one of the most amazing gifts that she could have given us, and that she taught me how to make a list and make a plan and set some goals and learn how to reflect on those goals. And I didn't learn until I was in my 20s that not everybody had a 3rd grade teacher that taught them how to do that. And so my friend Chanel, who's in the PhD program that I was in, she was saying that she didn't learn this skill until she was in her mid to late 20s. And so again, this is something really valuable that you can do as educators, is to help them learn how to break down tasks, set really small proximal goals so they can feel the reward of accomplishing those things. My favorite quote of all time is a Margaret Thatcher quote. And she says, "Plan your work for today and every day, then work your plan." When I first learned this quote, it was a little different, and it was my high school powerlifting coach. And I don't think he knew it was a Margaret Thatcher quote, but he would always say, plan your work, work your plan. Plan your work, work your plan. So what he was saying is, like, you don't go into the gym without a plan, or else you're going to fail, right? And so it has always been really meaningful to me in figuring out ways that we can make a plan for our work. The next strategy is to find a role model. Now, this is really key because so many times our students lack the social capital to know who to ask and how to ask someone to be a role model or to be a mentor for them. But this is a really important skill that we can help students. So whether you make it part of your class so that they are required to go find someone that they can have a series of 30-minute conversations with, to learn from, to be mentored by, to be a role model, to just ask questions. But it's so important that students learn how to seek this out for themselves rather than sort of expecting the role models to just fall in their lap. One of my favorite ways of looking at this is, if any of you remember or know the Dr. Seuss story, I think it's Dr. Seuss, Are You My Mother? Do you know this children's book? And so I think I need to brush up on my Dr. Seuss, but it's I think it's a duck, right? So it's hatched, and then the duck's mother isn't there. And so it goes around asking all these other animals, are you my mother? Are you my mother? Are you my mother? And I think this is how we should be with role models and mentors, is we go around asking everyone, will you be my role model? Will you be my mentor? And by doing that, we really gain a lot of benefit from people who are willing to contribute and invest in our lives. But this is, again, a skill that we can teach our students that boosts their mindset and their self-efficacy. The next one is to learn how to ask for feedback and to ask for help. And so, we're going to be talking about how to give feedback. And so I wonder how many of you have learned in adulthood how to accept feedback, or maybe you're still learning how to accept feedback, right? This is also a skill. It's really easy to get feedback and to jump into no man's land of sort of spinning out to that. And there is an art to learning how to accept feedback, just like there is an art to learning how to give feedback. And so one of the things that you can help students do is to learn how to be empowered to ask for help. Certainly for us as educators, we want to be accessible. We want to be as accessible as possible to our students, but we also want to empower them to learn how to ask for help and learn how to go and seek the help that they need and to not give up, right? It's sort of like dating. You go ask one person for help. If they don't give you what you need and it's not the right mix, you go find someone else, right? You don't just say, oh, I'm never going to ask for help again. And so helping them to realize like different ways that they can learn and ask for help. The next key thing is to learn how to learn from your mistakes. So learning from mistakes is really critical to mindset, because when you're thinking about what it is that you want to do and want to try next, and to realize that with effort, you are always, likely to have some mistakes, and you're likely to maybe have some failures, but to not wipe out all your future potential because of those. And so what this means for us as educators is, how are we creating learning environments that are safe for students to make mistakes and to safe for them to learn from those failures. And then the last strategy before we're going to go into, oops, I think my slides got mixed up here. Give me just a second. The next one is to, sorry, I got out of order there. The next one is to celebrate milestones. So this is a really important thing for us to be able to sort of benchmark our success. So, reflecting on what did I do, what did I learn from that, and then how do I continue on to the next challenge. I have a tool and the quick links that I dropped into the chat. Let me drop those in there again. So on my website, so link number 3, there is a sample planner page. So you can download a free page there, and it's a weekly planner, and it incorporates a lot of these things that we just talked about how you can make a plan, work the plan, track tasks. And so you can download that and share that with your students. Because again, we're trying to help them build the skills and build the tools that they need to be successful. The last one that we're going to look at here is building the courage to start. And so this really comes and how we're encouraging them and how we're providing effective feedback that's going to help them be successful. All right, so what I want you to do now is to access the link number 0. So that's going to go to a Google Slide file. And what you'll see there is we're going to do a breakout group here in a second, where you're going to talk about the things that I just went over. And you're going to do the following. You're going to discuss how motivation factors into student success in your classroom or your environment or whatever it is that you're teaching. I saw a lot of you are advisors. And so again, motivation is still playing a lot of, in how you're talking to students and advising them. If you are in a management role, again, think about this and how you're advising your faculty, your staff. So again, put this in your setting. The second is to think about, reflect, and discuss on how self-efficacy and mindset show up, again, your classroom, your environment, wherever. So again, you'll see those different things. And then based on what you know so far with the strategies that I gave you, I'm going to give you some more as we go throughout. How can you apply some of these strategies shared to improve student motivation? Now, what we're going to do is, when you'll find in the slide deck, you'll see a bunch of slides, and you're going to find your breakout group number. And your breakout group number is, it'll say like you're invited to go to breakout group, whatever. It'll be at the top of your screen as well. So you're going to find whatever group that you're in, and then you'll be able to edit the file. Now, if you look in the speaker notes for each of the slides, all the definitions and strategies are there. So you'll see a quick outline of what I just went over. So you've got the self-efficacy definition, the mindset, and then those list of strategies. And so that's a reminder of what it is that you're going to do. All right. So I'm going to set us up into breakout groups now. Let me get that going. All right, so I'd like to give you all an opportunity to report out, not necessarily on your whole conversation, but I'd like to hear some of the details around, how you can apply some of the strategies that were shared to improve student motivation within your classroom, within your advising, within your job. So let's do a little bit of a, you can raise your hand, just turn your mic on and start sharing. Some of the takeaways from your conversations. Hi, Ray.
Hey, I think one of the biggest things that we all agreed on was that motivation had to be linked to real world connection. So the students in the math class had to understand the benefit of what they were trying to be taught or what they were there to learn. Same thing in fire science and in theater and any of the fields, particularly gen ed, is that it's hard to get those skills connected to success in the student's mind. So I think motivation comes from a belief that there's a benefit, and that can take all sorts of forms. The other thing that we discovered was that, and there was a suggestion made, is that motivational memos, or short little motivational sayings that are delivered in a practical way to the student, seem to be helpful. Just drawing the line between why are you here, what are you going to get from it, and what do you need to do to get it. The other thing that we talked about was they may be motivated to be there, but they lack the discipline to succeed, especially in this new online world. A lot of our students are not used to that.
Yeah. I think I love what you said around, they need to find the interest in the real world application. That really goes to, having culturally responsive pedagogies and content that they can relate to. When we think about discipline, like many things, is a skill, right? Like I've worked from home since 2009. So when the world went to working from home, like I'm a pro at this, but some people who had never done it, it is really hard when you start. Like you have to develop a whole new form of discipline. And if we're expecting our students to just like be good at it on day one, right? Like it's anything. You have to practice and learn how to sort of make those routines. And so using a lot of the self-efficacy mindset strategies that we talked about can help create some of that discipline, because it gives you some structure to be able to plan. Another thing that kind of, that you reminded me of is that there's research that shows that when you start your class and ask students to just reflect on something that you've learned. I did that, but it was actually because it was the lesson, not necessarily because I wanted to put you into a good place of self-efficacy. But the research says that if you remind students that they've learned something, whether it's in your class or not, it actually puts them in that positive space of like, I can learn today too, right? And so that could be a really quick warm up of just write something down that you've learned this week. And then that helps them realize, okay, I'm capable of learning and I can learn throughout that. So that becomes a sort of self-motivation rather than always having to have the external. Thanks for sharing that, Ray. I appreciate that. Anything else? What are some other takeaways? Those are really good thoughts from your group.
So in our group, we talked about establishing like open communication, like right off the bat, like letting them know like the best ways to communicate with you, mentioning that there's ways to ask for help, not only with the instructor, but like I work at the library, we have the tutoring center upstairs, and telling them how to get in contact with the tutoring center. And just, establishing that open line of communication so that the students have the ability, like you instill that ability for them to ask for help.
Yeah, I like that. I think too, like when we create the syllabi for our classes, we can outline a lot of that there of like, here's where you can go for help in this. Another key piece of this is normalizing asking for help. So when the student comes to us or we notice that they need help, we can say, tell me some of the ways that you've asked for help, and who you've asked for help. And then they might say no one, and you're like, oh, well, where's your list? Let's pull up your list of people that you can ask for help. And so it becomes a sort of coaching and a normalizing of like, it's just normal and it's expected that you go and you ask for help. Thanks for that, Kat. I think, making sure people know all the resources on campus is so key. I remember when my little brother was in undergrad, he kept failing like I don't know, general math or whatever. Like he failed like 4 times. And big sister Megan, who has a PhD in engineering, was like, I'm done with this. Like, we got to get you some help. And I kept telling him, like, do you know where the learning center is? Like, do you know here are the people's names? And so I called them and I was like, expect him to walk in the door and please greet him with kindness, right? Because I was trying to like make it as easy for him as possible to show up. He never did, by the way. But but I tried to help him feel, as welcome and, able to walk into there to get the help that he needed. I do not understand the barrier for him, but our students face these. We don't always understand the barriers. We don't know what's causing them. When we're back in real, in person, a great practice is, can I walk you down there? Can I walk you to the learning center? Sometimes that takes a little bit more effort, but that's a really powerful suggestion of like, I'm here to make sure you get the help that you need. Thanks, Kat. What else came up in your conversations? Okay. All right. Well, so we're going to keep building on that. We're going to move to the next topic around the natural learning process. So you may wish to download the link number 1 and the quick links. Let me drop those back into the chat here. The file looks like the file has more than what we're covering in it today, but it has the learning process in it. So again, I just dropped it in the chat. It's the How Learning Happens PDF. And I'll make sure, for those of you who are on your phone, I'll follow up with Allison after this to make sure that you have links to all of these as well. And so when you download this file, that's the second slide that's got the learning process. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the neuroscience, but this is a really good tool for you to just kind of reflect. And it's got loads of strategies about what affects learning, and then how can we help ourselves learn and others learn as well. So this is a resource for you. Okay, now I want us to go back to the first warm-up exercise that we did when you were thinking about something that you learned. What I want you to do now is to think about how you learned that skill. Think about the practice. So we're individual, independent reflecting right now. Think about how you began to practice. What was different from when you first started practicing to, time down the road? How was your practice different? What did that look like? Think about the experience of when you started to develop some skillfulness and like some mastery in this task. What did that feel like? And how did it again affect your motivation to keep learning? So the questions are, again, go back to the practice that we were thinking about in the beginning. Think about how your practice changed over time to learn that new skill. And then what did it feel like when you became skillful, advanced, and then reached a level of mastery? And how did that motivate you more to keep learning or maybe learn something new? Add some reflections to this chat. And then again, I'd love to have someone raise their hand to share with the group a little bit about their experience. So I'll give you a minute to reflect. So Chris adds in the chat, when you find tips of the trade, I thought it was tricks of the trade, but tips of the trade works too. It helps make future projects easier. And you can use that knowledge on future projects, even a different style, for sure. Yeah. I always joke with my parents, like, what did you do in life before YouTube? And they're like, we failed a lot. That's what they say. YouTube is like the best example of like finding those role models and guides to help us learn things. I would bet that all of you who said that you've done remodeling watched a YouTube video or two, probably. So Chris, thanks for being the first to share. Somebody else drop in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and let me work through and ask some questions like Ray did. Oh, John added, just like with painting and even in teaching painting, you could begin with the basics and adjusting them with more advanced techniques, and then applying lots of repetition is what helped me become more skillful and advanced, more organized. So John, you'll be happy to know, I just started painting. Let's see, these are my COVID hobby. I'm learning, lots of failing. This one up here I did not do. That one's from Thailand, but that's my goal. I want to learn how to do that one. Michelle, okay, Kat says, when I figured out what tool you really needed, that's so true. Like sometimes it's a function of tools. I've learned this with my dad. My dad's a very skilled carpenter and just all around handy guy. And sometimes when I need to do woodworking projects, I go home and it's easier because he's got the right tools, right? Like I've got like a hand circular saw and like no clamps and it's a disaster. If I go home, he's got the right tools. It makes it easier for sure. Michelle adds, when you were learning to record your lectures, it was difficult. As you found new tools, new mic, it became easier. Yeah, and I think here too, like the more you do it, the better you get at it, right? Like you learn some of the sort of mistakes that you make and like how to get over those. Good. So Bo added mentorships. Tell me a little bit more about what you mean there.
What I was saying is by mentoring students as well as gaining mentors for ourselves. So basically like almost like a two-pronged approach where in fire science or in firefighting, we try to get our students hooked up with volunteer fire departments so they can actually get hands-on practical skills. So they have we're meeting all the three domains of the learning where they see it, they see the theory, they get the actual practical application. And then I'm also working with using my advisory board as my mentorships to seeing what's current and what are the kind of current skills needed in the industry.
Okay, yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, so you're talking, I think I hear you saying like there's some like learning to be a good mentor in there. Is that?
Yeah, kind of like a mentorship.
Okay. And so tell me about what it feels like now mentoring students than what it felt like when you first started.
We're relatively a new program, so it's when first it was kind of a challenge, and then once we did it a couple times, it made a lot more sense and was a lot more streamlined.
Yeah. I find in mentoring, as with coaching, it's a skill just like anything else. I think that a lot of the best mentoring and coaching skills are linked to what in education we call guided inquiry. So the skill set of learning to ask questions rather than give the answer. And that is, how many of you use guided inquiry in your work? And how many of you were excellent at it when you first started? I wasn't. I remember I was in a workshop once and this woman was just remarkable. Like she never answered a question. She always like kept asking questions and let the person learn. And I was like, that is magnificent. How do I do that? And then I started and it was real hard. I'm a little better at it now, but it's a constant practice. And I think it's just such a amazing skill. And I definitely am better than I was the first time that I tried that. So what we're going to sort of bridge here now is, again, that motivation and practice. And we're going to talk about the natural learning process. And so the natural learning process it comes from both brain and learning science. And this particular flow was developed by Dr. Rita Smilkstein and in her book, We're Born to Learn. This is a great book I recommend reading. I think that, yeah, second edition's the most recent one. There might be a third edition out now, but it's a really useful book in helping us to understand the way that our brains were formed and function to learn. And so this model really works through that. And so you can see that the very first thing that's part of this process is motivation. And it's that sort of statement of like, I don't know how to do it, but I'm willing to try. I think I can try. I want to put some effort into trying this. And then we move from that into this space of where we're beginning to practice. And so it's realizing like, with lots of practice, I'm going to start to understand some of these things. I remember what's interesting to me when I think of sort of mindset and whatnot is I mentioned my powerlifting background, but I was a competitive powerlifter for 18 years. But I had some injuries that I had to sort of step away. Well, forever I had to step away from it, but throughout those 18 years I had to step away. And when I was in high school, I couldn't compete my senior year because of injuries, and I thought, I want to take up golf, right? Like I'm a state champion powerlifter, I'll be great at golf. I don't know how I made that connection, but somehow in my head that's what I thought. And I didn't become a state national champion athlete without practicing. I practiced 6 days a week for hours at a time. But yet somehow in my brain, I thought I could just show up on a golf course and just be excellent. I was not excellent. I didn't make it a week and I quit. And I always looking back on that, it astounds me. How did I think that I could just be excellent at this thing when I was never excellent at anything, having not done lots of practice, right? And so this goes back to that self-efficacy of how do we translate, I can do this, so I can do that. So I had the self-efficacy that I could do it, but I stopped with the effort, right? And this is where we want to continue to support our students, is like, it's not just motivation, it's how do we get them to keep practicing. And so moving from that place of beginning practice, we get to this sort of advanced practice where the more you practice, the more that you're recognizing that you're improving and you're seeing that benefit back in your work. I think we could look at a lot of the examples that you see here where you can think about as you're practicing and you get some feedback from people, or you get some sort of feedback of like, wow, I mastered this part of the painting. I mastered this part of recording lectures. Like I got that. And that sort of gives an emotional, like actually it's a chemical buzz of like, okay, let's keep going, right? Like I can get that, I can get the next thing. And this is what happens a lot with practice, is we want to sort of trigger those different, hormones that allow us to have that inborn motivation system. The next phase of the natural learning process is skillfulness, where you really got the basics down, but then you start to explore and try new ways. And so we're going to watch a video here in a second where it's a great visual of understanding what's happening in the brain. But this point is where in your brain, what's happening is you've sort of got a good sort of highway of connectivity between your neurons. And now you really start to expand and create new ways and activities of doing that. And then that again parlays into this moment of refinement, where you can make decisions of what's better or worse and than what you tried before. And this includes a lot of reflection. That it's also part of that self-efficacy, right? So we talked about the self-efficacy, the importance of celebrating milestones and learning from mistakes. That's really key to this piece, and that connects in here. And then mastery is a point where you're like, I got this, I can do it lots of different ways. And mastery could mean lots of different things. So I, just started painting, so I am in no way a master painter. But you can reach different levels of mastery of like, I've mastered this technique. Now I can move to this technique, right? And so again, this learning process is really reciprocal of like, I want to learn this, I want to learn this. And so that's something that I have been playing with this year of like, I'm learning this technique, I want to learn this technique now, right? And so you keep bridging. And that is again, back to self-efficacy. If I could do this, then I think I can do that. And this is what we want to get our students to think about in the classroom. Let me know if you don't hear the audio on this.
What's going on in the brain when you learn?
Can you hear?
In order to learn anything, whether it's math, a foreign language, guitar, or how to dribble a basketball, you need to create and strengthen pathways in your brain. Think about shooting a free throw. Know that feeling when you've got it down and don't even have to think about it? That's muscle memory. Here's the thing. Muscle memory lives in the brain, not the muscles. Your brain controls everything your muscles do, and it does this by activating specific neural pathways for each and every movement. These are functional pathways, neurons working together to achieve a goal. Say you're learning how to shoot a free throw. If it's your first time doing it, you don't yet have a pathway for that movement in your brain. You need to create it. Let's use an analogy to look at what's happening in the brain during this time. When you're first learning, your brain is like a forest full of trees and dense foliage, with no clear pathway between point A and point B. As you learn the mechanics of shooting a free throw, you create a trail through the forest. Now you can shoot the free throw because you've created that pathway in your brain, but you probably don't make many shots because it's so new. The pathway isn't very clear yet. In order to improve your free throw, you need to refine and strengthen the free throw pathway in your brain. The way you do that is through practice. Practice gradually widens the trail through the trees, turning it into a dirt road between A and B. You're starting to get pretty good now. You're making more free throws than not. You don't have to think about the mechanics as much. That's because the pathway gets stronger after each practice rep, and you've done a lot of reps. With even more practice, the dirt road turns into a paved road connecting A and B, allowing information to be transmitted at a faster rate. Now you're a 70% free throw shooter, and when you step up to the line, you don't even have to think about it. Eventually, with enough practice, what started as a trail has become a full-blown highway. Now you're a master, draining almost every free throw, and the movement is completely second nature. Scientists call this plasticity, and it's your brain's innate ability to create and strengthen connections between neurons. These connections are the path.
All right, I really love that video because it helps, I think, create a really good analogy to thinking about how these pathways are formed. We're gonna, as the video did, and we're gonna talk just briefly a little bit about some of the neuroscience behind this. And so neuroscience is such a fascinating field because it's fairly new, right? The fMRI machine was invented in the late 90s, and that is what allowed us to begin to understand what's happening in the brain around learning, around tasks, around any kind of performance and things that we do. And so as that knowledge continues to grow, we're able to learn more about how we learn, about how we do, about how we function. And so I just think it's a really, really fascinating field. And so you heard at the end of the video, it talked about brain plasticity. And so what this means, brain plasticity, is the idea that our brains are malleable, right? They can move and grow. And when I say grow, I don't mean like tumors. That's a bad growth, right? Like I'm talking like growing connections. It's growing connections between different neurons. So what you see on the screen, that is a picture of a neuron. And there are several parts to the neuron. You've got the cell body, and coming at the cell body are all these dendrites. And then there is an axon that connects to these synapses. And so in our brain, we've got about 10 billion neurons, and they all have growth potential. So what we do when we're learning is we're building more dendrites, and those dendrites are connecting to more neurons in our brain. So when you think about what's happening in your brain when you learn a new task, you don't have very many neurons that are connected. But the more that you do the task, the more those neurons connect. How many of you have ever learned another language and then forgot it, and then like kind of learned it again and like forgot it? Okay, just me? Fine. All right. So thanks, Kat, for giving me that acknowledgement. So I was previously fluent in Spanish. I lived in Spain, and I studied there and worked there, and then I moved back to Texas and stopped speaking Spanish, and then I moved to Puerto Rico for a year. I guess it's been almost a decade now, and it was amazing because a lot of the stuff was still in my brain, but all of those dendrites had sort of started to fade, and they started to look like this. So you can have enriched neurons, but then those neurons can start to become impoverished, and it sort of shrinks the dendrites. But as I started speaking, and I was studying every day while I was living there, those dendrites started to kind of grow again and sort of reform new connections to the other neurons that held that knowledge. So you have to rebuild those pathways. So again, if you go back to the imagery of the forest, actually, Puerto Rico is a great example of thinking about the forest. So when I lived there back in 2013, I guess it's 13, I lived there. And then 3 years ago, I went back for 2 months. What was interesting is like the infrastructure in Puerto Rico had really sort of fallen, meaning the roads. And so there were a lot of roads that I would normally drive when I lived there before that I couldn't drive on again because the forest had overgrown them, right? Like jungles don't want roads. They like will swallow them. And so that is what had happened. And that's what happens in our brain when we're trying to learn things, is if we stop doing it, if you don't use it, you will lose it. All of the forest starts to grow back. So, we want to help our students continue a practice that they can continue to develop those skills and keep those highways going. I forget who it was in the chat that said that they're learning Spanish. And a year ago, I committed to studying Spanish every single day. So I used the Duolingo app, love it. And I have done it almost every day for the last year. And the whole purpose is that I'm planning to move back to Puerto Rico as soon as I can. Global pandemic not helping that very much, but I'm committed that when I go, I want those neural pathways wide open so I don't have to keep relearning it, and that app is a really great way to do it for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes a day. to again, thinking about that forest, that highway of knowledge. So this video is just really interesting to watch how neurons function.
Everything you see here is real data. We're looking through a microscope at neural tissue, going down through an area of the brain called the medial prefrontal cortex. We can use these microscopic images to reconstruct the three-dimensional layout of the neurons and really see the intricate and intertwining patterns that they make. These connectivity patterns throughout the brain underlie all neural function and are responsible for everything from controlling your muscles when you tie your shoes to how you feel about your family. Understanding these patterns is a massive ongoing project for neuroscientists everywhere and could lead to breakthroughs for everything from consciousness to depressive disorders and schizophrenia. In this example, we injected purple dye into a far distant brain region called the amygdala, which is largely where our emotions and feelings of fear are generated. The purple wires are axons, or connections, coming from the amygdala into this area. We've also used some recent advancements in genetic engineering to select only the neurons inside this region that connect to the amygdala and dye them green. By combining both the green and purple dyes, we're able to see the full circuit of connections, viewing both the neurons that connect to the amygdala and connections coming back in from the amygdala. The locations and patterns of the neural connections, called synapses, show us how heavily these two groups of neurons are connected. To help us start to understand the incredible complexity of these neural networks, we develop computational techniques that segment or isolate individual neurons. By isolating a neuron, we can measure its characteristics, like size, shape, how many branches it has, and what general type of neuron it is. This may not seem like much, but it's really important for understanding so much about the brain. For instance, we know that malnutrition, stress, and cognitive disorders can all change how these branches look, but there are so many details that we don't know. That's why we, as scientists, keep pushing the envelope. To tackle these very complicated questions, we are getting together and combining fields ranging from physics and biology to mathematics and computer science. Every year, every day, we learn so much more. This is the most exciting and progressive time for neuroscience that there has ever been.
All right. So I wanted to show that to you because I think that it's really fun to see the visuals, at least it is to me, and it helps us to really see how, like, what's happening in our brain. One of the things that the speaker mentions in the end is it talks about how what's happening in the brain, like malnutrition and other forms of scarcity, affect the cognitive capacity. And so this is something I want us to keep in mind with our students, especially as we're functioning in the midst of a global pandemic and people are experiencing lots of things that maybe they didn't experience before, negative things, or if they or experiencing food scarcity or trauma, it could be exacerbated right now as well. And so what happens in our brain is, if you think about the fact that we have X amount of bandwidth, everybody has a bandwidth. Some people might have more, some people might have less. And if you think about all those connections of the neurons that are happening in the brain, if you are experiencing scarcity of anything, it could be food, it could be shelter, safety, it could be money, it could be respect, belonging, any kind of scarcity of that thing, you have all of these things happening in your brain, all of these neurons and neural networks firing, and it lowers your capacity to be engaged in learning. Again, another useful exercise for mindfulness. Now, mindfulness doesn't erase hunger and poverty, but it can help students to really center and bring themselves to the present to think about what it is that they want to learn. And so this is important for us as educators to remember that our students are, and us too, are coming into our work, we're coming into learning environments with so much that's on our mind. And the more that we can allow ourselves to kind of compartmentalize and set some of those things aside, the better that we'll be able to learn. it gives us an opportunity to really practice empathy with our students, and recognizing that there are times when your mental bandwidth is jammed, when all of those networks are fighting each other. It lowers, again, our cognitive and executive control. So cognitive is our ability to learn, and executive control is our ability to sort of function, like be on time and to like execute different kinds of tasks. Both of those are really important to learning, right? And students can be affected in different ways from those things. So what we're going to do now is I know that there was some confusion on the last exercise, so I want to make sure we get enough instruction here. So don't go to the breakout room until you're really clear on what it is that the task is. I want to make sure that you have what you need. So for the second activity, what I want you to do is I want you to think of a lesson that you normally teach. Or if you're an advisor, I want you to think of a way in which you try to communicate information to students. So again, think about your setting, what makes the most sense for your world. And I want you to think about how could you map that lesson out through the natural learning process. You may already do this, but what I want you to think about is how could you be really intentional about supporting students through that process. And the sort of second layer to this is how are you incorporating the strategies for boosting self-efficacy and mindset. So if you haven't already, make sure that you download the file number 1 on my list here, the How Learning Happens PDF. Go to page 2 of that. That's got the learning process. There's some more resources through that. And then that's going to help you map out a lesson. So before we go into breakout groups, I do want to give you a minute to think about a lesson or something that you're trying to teach someone. Because once we're in your small groups, what I want you to do is to share the lesson and how you can map it through each phase of the natural human learning process. And then I want you to coach one another. So again, I'm going to make the groups a little bit bigger this time because I think that some of the groups weren't able to be all engaged and active. So the breakout groups only work if you talk to each other. They only work if you participate. And so somebody please take the lead and champion that. I have duplicated what I just presented to you in the chart paper, the digital chart paper. You can add notes if you want. It's not particularly required. It helps me know that you're making progress. So because I can't be in all places at once. But again, the point is for you to map out a lesson, share it with your group, and offer each other feedback of like ways that they could really help move through that. Is this clear? If you have any questions, raise your hand, turn your mic on, put a question in the chat. All right, I'm gonna shuffle the breakout rooms again. I'm gonna make them let's see, recreate. I did notice a bunch of people dropped out as soon as I said more breakout rooms. So thank you for sticking with us to do this work together. We're going to do about 6 people per room. All right, again, no, Joy, you don't need to write down everyone's lesson. You don't need to write down any of them. It's just a tool for you to use, and it helps me like know that you're making some progress in your conversation. Again, we're going to do this for about 10 minutes, probably just like we did before, and move us into the break at 10 till. And so I'll check in to make sure that you're doing okay. If you were in a group and nobody's talking, drop out and I'll put you in another group, okay? But please, let's participate, right? We came here to learn today. All right, see you back in a while. Welcome back, welcome back. All right, I'd love to have some people report out some of the examples that they worked through, a lesson that that you mapped to the different stages of the learning process, and how you incorporated some strategies that we've already talked about into that. So you can just unmute your mic and start sharing with me.
I'll go ahead and go.
Great.
In our group, I'm an English teacher, so I volunteered to give an example because it's relatively simple. At least I thought that it was. It's a research paper. So I have defined steps that go throughout the semester, and they kind of build on each other. So they'll pre-write something as a group about the topic, and then I check in with them that way, kind of like breakout groups, only in person, not, via this way. But anyway, same kind of deal. And then we go from there to they'll write a rough draft, and then they'll incorporate research, and then they write the final. So it has steps that go through it. And so I discussed with them that when I first started teaching here, I was relatively young. It's really young. And so I naively thought, okay, great, let's do Shakespeare, let's do Jane Austen, which is wonderful. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things, but very quickly I realized these adults and students want to know how it's applicable to their life. Like, they want to know why they're learning it and how they're going to use it. And so I thought, okay, how can I accomplish that? So about 5 years ago, I finally hit on something that I really like to do. I teach the hero's journey archetype. And we go through Star Wars. I have them do Hunger Games. That's what they write their paper on. So because it's more modern, quote unquote, and accessible, and they've heard about it, I get better results because they're connected to it more.
Mm-hmm. I think you froze.
Did I?
Oh, maybe you finished. I remember in my freshman English class in high school, we watched Star Wars and studied the archetypes in that. And there's not a lot
really
that has
cool.
really stuck with me, but that's particularly, it's one specific thing I do remember. Yeah. So what I heard you saying.
Lucas wrote Star Wars.
That's right.
That's why Lucas wrote Star Wars. That's why he did Star Wars, was he wanted to tell a modern hero's journey for American youth, I guess, at the time. So that's why his whole script maps out the hero's journey. It's really cool.
Cool. I'm perhaps ashamed to say that is the only Star Wars film I've ever seen in my life, but it was fun back then. So what I heard you saying in your explanation is that you create a sort of scaffold for the students to be able to sort of build their paper and their work around that scaffold. That's really excellent pedagogy. It aligns to self-efficacy theory because you're helping them to set those small goals, and you're helping to sort of break down this bigger task. It's also culturally responsive because it creates something that's a little bit more, potentially meaningful to them. And so that's a really, really good example. I think research papers, that's a great point. When you think about the usefulness of it, something that when I mentor and advise students, I always encourage them to think about every paper that they write, that they should be publishing it on their website. Because if you think, when I'm writing, and I didn't start this till I was in my doctoral program, but somewhere on my website are all my old papers. I should probably be embarrassed by them now, but I wrote better papers because I knew that I was going to put it on my website, that it wasn't going to be lost in some file 13 and it wasn't going to go away. And so to me, that was that sort of, what does this mean for me? It means I'm building my thought leadership in this space, and I'm trying to contribute to that. And so again, whatever we can do to help students think of everything that they do as part of their professional portfolio, rather than just tasks that they're just sort of checking off and doing. Let me see what's in the chat here. Oh, we've got trivia fact from Chris.
And all of us in the group had similar practices. It wasn't just me. All of the people in the group, in their own courses they taught, did something really similar.
Yeah, that's great. And how do you think, what did you specifically notice in the motivation and how it changed with your students from Shakespeare to Star Wars?
They're more engaged, and I don't really know how to put this. except to say, you know, even myself, when I read something Shakespeare, for example, sometimes you can feel a little, not dumb, but like unintelligent, or like you're not getting it, right? And so I have less of that because it's so, you know, there's a movie and they've heard about it before. They're more apt to connect with it than not.
Yeah. So can you tell me, what did you observe in their, so you sort of talked about their interest and motivation. What about their performance? How was the quality of the papers? Was it better when you had a different kind of context?
Yes, because of the scaffolding. Because I scaffolded stuff, everything, and they know from the beginning. I showed them a sheet that says, here are the steps, and here's how every assignment is going to build to the last assignment. And they're like, okay. So I never got the question after that, hey, why are we doing this? I could point to the sheet and go, because it relates to assignment 4 3 months from now. So that's why we're doing it. And they're like, oh, okay. And so all of that builds to their final paper.
So you may already do this, but another approach to sort of tack on to that to drive motivation even more is to say, you know, you can do Star Wars or Hunger Games, or find another movie, Approve It With Me, that has the hero's journey, and that can increase some students' motivation to do it even more if it's another movie that
oh no, we do the book. I show them the movie in class. We do the novel.
Okay, yeah. Read the books too. But like same point of like, if there's another book that has the hero's journey, that's right, it is English. But
I know that half of them don't read the book, but you know, I like to dream.
Ready Player One, it's one of my favorite new ones. The book is a million times better than the movie, but I think that's also a hero's journey, maybe. But,
it is.
Okay, thanks, Laura. I appreciate you sharing with us. Somebody else, share with me a lesson and how you've mapped it to the natural learning process and how you incorporate strategies for boosting self-efficacy and mindset.
Okay, in chemistry, usually if we're talking about Charles' law, Boyle's law, I just kind of relate it to real life experiences that they go over every day. I always tell them with Charles' law, I say, this is something you're familiar with every day, which states that pressure and temperatures, volume and temperature directly proportional. As the temperature increases, the volume increases. And I'll say, let's say you're at home cooking some rice. The rice starts to boil over. What's the first thing you do? And they say, turn down the fire. I say, why you turn down the fire? Because when I turn down the fire, it's not going to boil over anymore. I said, exactly. I'll lower the heat. I'll lower the volume. And
Excellent.
then with Gay-Lussac's law, I said, what would if I walked in this classroom with a can on the side of the can, it says kerosene. That's a metal can. And I stick it up on the Bunsen burner and light a fire up under it. What y'all gonna do? Y'all gonna sit here and watch and see what happens? No, we getting out the classroom because Miss Hoff, you done lost your mind. I said, well, it's in a metal can. Where is it? What's gonna happen? As I heat it, the pressure's going to increase, and eventually that can's gonna blow. Increased temperature, increased pressure. That can has to blow, and the whole building's gonna be on fire. So if I lower the temperature, I lower the pressure. If I increase the temperature, I increase the pressure. So I just kind of relate it to real life stuff that they're familiar with every day, and they get it. And when they get to the test, I usually ask them even during class when we're going back to review. If I increase the temperature, what's going to happen to my volume? Oh, it's going to increase. They get it the first time because of how I explain it, relating it to real life. Even when we go over our 4 different types of reactions, we got combination, decomposition. I always tell myself, combination reaction, you can spot it right away. 2 things come together and form one. It's like a marriage. Decomposition. You got one thing breaking apart, forming 2. That's a divorce. A single replacement. I say that's one person in the marriage cheating. He go out there and he see the grass green on the other side of the road. He got to go over there. And a double replacement, those are just swingers. They go to the party together and each one of them leave with somebody else.
I like how you're using humor. Okay, so what is your name, sir?
Danny Hofston.
Danny, I just got an education, I just have to say. Will you
Thank you,
send me
Danny.
a professional development certificate? Because I learned a lot.
Yeah, so I appreciate you sharing that. And I like how you're making it, make sense, and you're putting that real world application. And I also like that you're using humor in it. That is a great teaching tool that some people are effective at. So when you use these different kinds of examples, do you see that the motivation increases, and you see
Yes,
that the
I mean,
performance
I see that most of them get it right away. And there is another one that I also use. So I've had students that ask me why I use them. I say, because everybody gets it. And I don't care about your sexuality, I can care less. And that's when we were sitting there talking about a reaction. They'll say, well, I don't know what two to put together. I say, humans are gay. Chemistry ain't gay. You put them two metals together, that's gay chemistry. It ain't gonna happen. So you put a metal and a non-metal together. Don't you put them two metals together, ain't gonna happen. And then they say, oh, I got it. I say, exactly. Everybody got it the first time I explained it. I ain't got to explain it ever again. Whether you gay or straight, you got it.
Danny, you need to stop talking.
And I tell them, that way I know everybody gets the point, and it sticks, and you won't mess it up when I actually put it on a test.
All right. Thanks so much for those examples, Danny. So, I think that learning how to have those real world examples is really, really critical to inspiring interests and sparking motivation to pursue any kind of task. I will never forget one year I was teaching a workshop somewhere in Florida. An educator said to me, like, I don't need to have real world applications. And I'm pretty sure my jaw just like probably hit the floor. And they were stone cold serious. Like, why would I need to do that? They just need to learn the formulas. And I'm like, clearly you've not heard anything I've said in this workshop, because the whole point is like, we want to provide some interest for students and make it more culturally responsive. And like, just learning theories isn't the answer. Like, it's learning, what does it mean for us in our world? Whether it's learning how to, what Laura was talking about with the hero's journey. If we can teach students how to, read books and create that sort of thoughtfulness around things, that's a useful skill to processing any kind of information and just uncovering those different kinds of narratives, or, whatever your application is. Helping students develop those critical thinking skills and the application is really, really key. All right, well, thank you for sharing those examples. We're going to step into the last topic, which really kind of ties everything together here, and that's around feedback. So what I want to ask and to prompt you is, what makes feedback effective and what makes feedback ineffective? So you can add your thoughts to the chat and let me know what makes feedback effective, what makes it ineffective. Well, if you all are up for it, I can turn on the annotation and we can do it here. Are you all ready to do annotation, or would you rather do chat? So you can do the chat or the annotation. So to do the annotation, you'll find the bar, let's see, where is it on my screen? You'll find the 3 dots and then turn on annotation. I think, although I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. All right, so let me look at the chat here. So Stacy says feedback is effective when it comes from a knowledgeable source. Okay. Laura says it's specific for sure. Chris says constructive versus destructive, finding a way to explain that even when they are wrong, it builds them up and not down. Joy adds effective is specific, clear, and focused. Timely, yes. Joy says ineffective, vague. Yeah, I think that feedback, it doesn't always have to necessarily be encouraging. It depends on the amount, your relationship and the amount of trust built up between the two of you. Laura says it can have definite action steps for improvement. Joy says maybe not overwhelming. number, do you mean like the amount of feedback that you give? Michelle adds, feedback is effective when the explanation is detailed and quick. I think maybe you mean timely, like not how fast can you say it, but like within the amount of time. Ray says, effective feedback demonstrates an understanding of the goal of the other. Yeah, I like that. Joy says 3 to 4 focus areas versus every. Oh, okay. Right. I remember when I first started learning how to coach other athletes, I failed in the beginning because I wanted to tell them every single thing that they need to do in the beginning. And it's just like process overload. I actually gave this feedback to my friend who is also my physical therapist. The first day I went in to see her, she told me in an hour that my spine is shaped incorrectly and I need to do some exercises to change it. I stand wrong, I walk incorrectly, I breathe incorrectly, and that my jaw, like it was all the stuff. And I like didn't go back to see her for weeks because I was like, I can't process this much information. And I finally, after a few months, because she is my friend, I was like, can I give you some feedback? Like, are you open to that? And I said, you know, it might be useful in your practice as a physical therapist to use some learning theory. Like there is a cognitive capacity in which we can process information. And if you give someone too much at once, they can't do it. You just can't process it. And then it becomes this sort of sense of failure of like, well, okay, I can't do it. So you just end up not doing it all. Whereas if you have those really bite-sized steps and a plan, and I kept saying, well, let's make a plan and a progression of like, we're going to focus on this piece for these months, and the next months we're going to do this. It's the same thing when we're teaching, is how do we help people make those really small proximal goals to make the changes that we need. Yeah, so you offered some great examples that really tie to the literature here around what makes feedback effective, and how do we, you know, make sure that it's timely. Timely, again, we'll talk about all the key characteristics in a minute, but timely is so critical because how many of you have ever had somebody give you feedback that's like 6 months, a year later, maybe you've had an annual review and somebody like brings up something from last year and you're like, what? Like, why didn't we talk about this last year? Like you can't even hardly remember what the feedback is that you're giving me, and now it doesn't make any sense. And you couldn't have made any change on that. Like it's really useless feedback as an employee. And then for us for you all as educators who are in the classroom, thinking about like, if you wait too long to give feedback, then they can't incorporate that and make the changes that they need to make. All right, so we're going to, now we're gonna focus on learning a little bit more about feedback, and we're gonna learn about sticky feedback and how it can boost motivation. I think that when I shared my screen, I didn't share audio. So, oh, was I not sharing at all? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't think you've missed anything. That's why you couldn't do annotation, because there's nothing to annotate. Let's see, share screen, desktop 3. Okay. So we're gonna watch another little brief video. I think it's like 4 minutes. And then we'll continue the lesson from there. Maybe not, I got the order.
Throughout our lifetime, we get tons of feedback. We likely get plenty of good jobs, well dones, atta girls or atta boys, all kinds of feedback. And the feedback we receive in our life affects our motivation. It helps us answer the question, can I do this? When we ask ourselves this question, we are measuring our self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the belief one holds in their ability to accomplish a task. Self-efficacy is different than self-esteem. Self-esteem answers the question, how do I feel about myself? This difference matters because high self-efficacy predicts achievement, whereas self-esteem does not. Since self-efficacy affects our behavior and performance, where does it come from? There are 4 sources. First, mastery experiences. That's previous related experiences and performances. One might think, I did task, therefore I think I can do more challenging task. Second, vicarious experiences, or simply the observation or introduction of role models. One might think, someone did task, therefore I think I can do task. Next, physiological or emotional cues, if interpreted as signs of ability. One might think, just because I'm experiencing this emotion or physiological response, it doesn't mean I cannot do task. Finally, social persuasion is feedback and support from others. One might think, someone said they believed I could do task, therefore I think I can do task. Feedback messages like these are a type of social persuasion. But are the attaboys and attagirls, the simple pat on the back with a good job, that useful in building our self-efficacy? With some adjustments and using a very simple formula, we can improve our feedback messages to be a super booster for self-efficacy. Let's start with the story. When I was a little girl, I remember going to the grocery store with my parents and always longing for a quarter to spend in the vintage toy machines near the checkout. I knew inside those machines were fun little toys. Two of the most common toys I recall were bouncy balls that were quickly lost under the furniture, and the sticky wall crawlers that you could just throw at a wall, entertaining me for hours. Feedback reminds me of these two simple toys. Bouncy ball feedback is the pat on the back, nice job type of feedback. Though well-intentioned, it doesn't really stick with us. Sticky feedback is praise with acknowledgement of a specific mastery task and acknowledgement of effort. Plus, when we offer process-based praise, we support a growth mindset. Let's give sticky feedback a try. I believe that you can do this. I know that because you have demonstrated achievement that suggests so, and I noticed that you worked really hard along the way. While this feedback is generic, it's best to be as specific as possible. You might be asking, what's the point of building self-efficacy? Well, a person with a high self-efficacy has greater achievement, interest, motivation, engagement, performance, and persistence. So, the next time that you offer feedback, remember, sticky feedback is best.
All right, now some of that was a bit of a review from what we covered in the first hour, but I wanted to introduce the sort of, example that brings us how sticky feedback came to be. And so as it said in the video, the sticky feedback, it is drawn from these functions of self-efficacy that we spoke about. And so it sort of focuses on the mastery experiences, and it's that social persuasion. It's your feedback and the support that you're offering to whomever that you're offering it. And so the formula, if you didn't get it written down, is, remember the sticky feedback, it's those sort of attaboys and attagirls. It's just feedback. And it's just, maybe it's just the encouragement of like, I believe you can do it, right? But it doesn't really stick with you. I think if you were to reflect on feedback that you've received in your life, those attaboys, attagirls don't really resonate, right? The feedback that has been most influential in your motivation and choice to do things likely had this sort of formula here of the mastery experience, the social persuasion, and acknowledgement of effort. And so when we do these, we're helping to boost self-efficacy, we're helping to reinforce a growth mindset because effort is key, and we're able to provide more effective feedback that allows them to again, increase that motivation and continue along the effort. So let me go back. I skipped the slide of the characteristics of feedback. And so drawing back to what, from the list that you all created, and then specifically tying back to the literature. So the characteristics of effective feedback, so the specific feedback is one formula of it, But characteristics of effective feedback is always very specific and informative, and you all typed that into the chat in your explanation. The second is it must be timely and frequent. There is literature that's talking about how the annual reviews need to like go away because they're largely ineffective, and that the best way to manage employees and to manage staff is to just regularly give feedback when you have meetings with them, and to help them always know where they stand and what they need to do. The third one is it's based on initial steps. So when we talk about, when I talked about helping to break tasks down and to set those sort of small proximal goals, you want to give feedback that's sort of building on the initial steps that they've done, right? So, when you're talking about, some of you are, looks like you're grading papers and whatnot, you want to offer feedback of like, hey, when we wrote the first paper, we learned these skills, and you're trying to apply these skills into this next paper. And so again, or we learned these initial steps in algebra, and now we're applying that into this next step in algebra. So again, you try to build on and remind them of the steps that they're taking to get to where you want them to learn. Perhaps it goes without saying, but your feedback needs to be respectful, and not overly gratuitous. So I think that there are a lot of popular formulas of like the sandwich method of like, hey, you're awesome, and you need to fix this, and you're awesome, right? So like that can really get overdone, and people receive it as you being really disingenuous. And so the literature tells us that when we learn to give really effective feedback, and we give it in a really transparent and authentic way, it actually builds trust with those individuals, and it allows us to be more effective in giving feedback. And we don't always have to have that sort of sandwich thing. I do think it's good to like provide positive feedback as well. So we don't always want to give the negative feedback. But again, the more that you get to know someone and have that relationship with them, when they trust that you have their best interest at heart, then they are more likely to receive feedback, and you don't have to have that sort of overly gratuitous kind of approach. The next one is growth-minded. And so remember, the growth-minded is talking about like, with effort, you can do this. And we want to encourage them to keep putting that work forward. The next one is prompting and not answering. So we talked a little bit about that earlier, about sort of guided inquiry. And so, when we're trying to give feedback, sometimes it's really effective to let the students or let your employees or whomever answer the question themselves. Like, well, what do you think that you could have done better? And keep asking those kinds of questions where you prompt them to know what they want to do. From the coaching literature, it tells us, like the best coaches don't ever give advice, right? The best coaches are always asking you questions, and sort of like, it's like you're corralling them into a direction of their own truth and their own knowledge. But then sometimes we definitely need feedback that's sort of perhaps outside our zone of proximal development, so that we can apply that knowledge. The second to last is praising the process, not the ability. And to me, I think this is one of the most common ways where we give feedback and ineffective, saying like, hey, you're so smart, you're Harvard bound, like it teaches them that intelligence is something about them, and it's not about their hard work. Dr. Carol Dweck, she suggests that we should remove the word smart from our vocabulary because it doesn't benefit students. And she specifically noticed this when it comes to like some of the high achieving students. And I can say, like, I remember in my experience growing up, like everybody kept telling me I was always so smart. I also worked really hard, right? Like I didn't just like come out of my mother's womb doing calculus problems. Like I worked really hard, but when everyone just kept saying you're so smart, you're so smart, it made me realize like, well, maybe the effort, it's not the effort that matters, right? It's just something sort of genetic about me. And then that can actually affect mindset. It lowers your self-efficacy and your motivation. Whereas if we praise students, say, oh, you're working really hard and that's really paying off. That is way more effective in motivating and keeps someone to keep trying and taking on new challenges. And the last is, I think, one of the most important, is that when we're giving feedback, it's so critical that we imply confidence that they can do it. And this is really where our tone comes into play. Because if we give somebody feedback, but yet there's like some like hint in our voice, it was like, yeah, I don't really think you're going to be able to do it, right? They can hear that. And so we have to be really, really careful and thoughtful that we also believe they can do it. And so that we communicate that. Sometimes we want to say the words of like, here's what I think you can do. And I really believe that you can do it. I have high expectations for you. And here's what I set, the task for us to do. And we're going to help you get there. I know that you're capable of this. That's really, really important for, again, that social persuasion of self-efficacy. If someone said, I think you can do this, we're going to help you get there. All right, so let's think about some examples of, a little out of order here. Pardon me. So what I want us to do now is to try it. I want us to try creating sticky feedback statements. So it doesn't matter what the context is. I want you to share it in the chat. Or you can turn your mic on and be a volunteer, and we can talk about it there. So think about anything, whether you're giving your grandkid feedback on their coloring, or you're giving your partner feedback on their spaghetti, right? Like any kind of context, it doesn't matter. I want to get us to give as many examples as we can, practicing the formula of sticky feedback. And you can incorporate some of the other characteristics as well.
I had a student several years ago, and I teach chemistry. And this was a nursing student who felt like she couldn't do it. And I told her, I said, girl, you're one of the best students in the class. She actually dropped the class. I went to the registrar's office and told him, put her back in there and give me her phone number. And I called out and said, there is no way I'm going to let you drop my class. I expect to see you in the classroom. You can do this, and I know you can do it. About 5 years later, I saw her in the mall with her mom, and she was like, Mom, that's the man I was telling you about. That's the teacher that wouldn't let me drop chemistry. And the mom came over and gave me a hug, talking about, thank you, because my daughter would not be a nurse today if you had let her take the shortcut. And I told her, I said, there is no shortcut in life. You're going to just have to work hard, and you can do it. You've proven yourself already, but you're ready to give up, and I'm not going to let you give up.
Yeah.
And
what you're talking about, Danny, is so important, and it really ties into a lot of other things that we didn't necessarily talk about today. But, especially for women in STEM and many STEM pathways, there are lots of other sort of unconscious and systemic barriers that push women and people of color out of those pathways. And the influence of educators doing just what you did, saying like, hang on, we're going to work through this. You belong here. You deserve to be here. It goes a long way in helping students stay within those pathways. And what's interesting, and again, it's a different workshop, but when we look at some of the differences around, aggregate around gender and race, there are different sort of ways of processing. And one of the theories is called Attribution Theory. So it's how you attribute success to something. And the research tells us that girls and women are more likely to attribute their lack of success in something to their ability, whereas boys and men are more likely, again, these are generalizations, more likely to attribute it to sort of external forces. So if I make a 95 on my math test, I'm going to think, oh, I'm just terrible at math. Whereas most boys and men would be like, oh, the teacher, didn't like my answer or whatever, right? So it's internal versus external. Those are generalizations. It's not everyone, but it's the way we've been sort of conditioned and gendered to sort of process information and how we attribute success. So let me look at some of the examples you have here. So Kat says, I really like the way you did X. I think you could improve this by thinking about Y. Yeah, so what you're talking about there is, so you bring in, you're sort of tapping into a mastery experience. Like you did this. You could say you could add in like you were successful at doing this other task. So you added in I think you could improve this by thinking about why. Yeah. And so you could tack on a few more words around effort of like, you worked really hard this far, keep going, something like that. So Ray says, wow, your efforts really paid off. I knew you could do it. Yeah, this is something that's it's so much more effective than just the attaboy, attagirl, or like, hey, awesome, right? Like saying someone effort really paid off. I try to do this when I have friends or colleagues or whatever that lose weight, right? Like there's always effort that goes into that. And that's a simple way of saying like, wow, I know you're working really hard. That's great. It's paying off. Or when you see someone who's seeing any kind of improvement in their skill of like, how, you know, like you're working hard, it's paying off. That's a great sort of pivot in our sort of common language of like, cool, way to go. You're gifted, you're talented, you're so lucky, right? Like those aren't the most effective ways to build people up. Michelle says, you're on your way to the finish line, hang in there. Yeah, that's another great example of having some high expectation of like, you know, you're on your way. You could have some invocation of like, I know that you can do this. Joy says, you did well in the exam because you reread the questions and passages. Yeah, so that is mastery experience and tying into effort. You took a lot of time to make sure you did your best to understand what's being asked and you could do it. Yeah, well done. So that really brings in all the different components of invocation of high standard. You're tying into mastery experiences and effort. Nice. Donna says, for those working hard, you did a great job on the quiz. You spent time on the homework. Your time spent on the homework really paid off. On the other hand, students who obviously cheated, wow, I'm impressed you made an A on this test in less than 15 minutes. That one might be a little harder. Yeah, I don't know that I have the best answer for how to give feedback to students who cheated. But Donna, that might be a good approach. I teach teachers, so if you cheat, I don't really know. But okay, so these are great examples. So what I want us to do for our activity here is we're going to really practice writing out some specific feedback that's going to be effective for you and your class. So maybe, I know that you don't have anything to grade right now because school hasn't come back in, but I want you to write some prompts, right? So prompts that you can sort of pull out a list of like when I need to give feedback, when I'm writing feedback to, you know, whatever you're grading, that you've sort of got some go-to statements. And so again, your task is to create some prompts and go-to statements within your sphere of influence and however you're grading students, all right? I don't have this is for you to just write on your paper. I don't have the Google slides set up for you to do this. And so this is really an independent exercise. And so I want you to spend like about 10 minutes on this. And the outcome that you want out of this is a kind of cheat sheet, a feedback cheat sheet of how you're going to help provide the most effective feedback for people that's either sticky or, you know, including some of those key characteristics. So I'm going to stay here. We're going to all stay in the room together, write some of those things down. If you want to share them in the chat, you can, but this is really for you. So again, your task is creating your feedback cheat sheet. In another minute or so, as you're making your list of common prompts, you may want to sort of group them in different ways for easy access. And as you're doing that, think about what's a process that you can put into place to easily access this tool that you're creating for yourself. Let's come back together. I want to hear some reflections from the process. Tell me a little bit maybe about the tool that you've made and how you plan to use it in the coming semester.
Hey, Megan. So I direct our Open Campus program, and that's our free tutorials, smartphone tutorials for our developmental students. So I have to include a lot of feedback on the practice quizzes that's generic. So I always have trouble coming up with effective feedback for wrong answers. So you gave me some ideas, you know, something like, sorry, that's incorrect, but keep working on it. You can learn if you keep practicing. Go back and review the video and try again. Learning takes time and practice. Keep going. You can learn this if you keep trying. Don't give up now. Those types of
Yeah, I like that. So 2 things I want to add to that is I forgot to say, one of the most powerful feedback tools is 3 simple letters, yet. So if you say, somebody says that they can't do it, or you want to say that they're not quite there, you say, okay, you're not quite there yet, because that indicates a belief that they're going to be there. Another 3-letter word I want to talk about is the word but. I would argue that 90% of the time when we use the word but, we actually mean and. And it's, for some reason in our vernacular, it's just commonplace to use that conjunction. And so I'd like to encourage all of you, I am doing this constantly as well, is really being thoughtful about the use of that word when I really mean and, because the word has a tendency to negate everything that you just said. Whereas the word and, if you've ever done improv, it's always about yes and. You want to build on whatever the sort of idea or skit that someone had. And so this can be a fun kind of game to use in your staff meetings, right? Is to kind of keep track of how often people say the word but, and like almost make it a game of like, I think you mean and make it a sort of fun exercise of really challenging and changing our language. Yeah. Thanks, Allison. Another example, somebody want to share about the tool that you made and how you can use it? Ray.
You were talking about substituting and for but. I quickly scanned over to mine to see if I had any buts in there. And I noticed that I have a lot of nows.
Okay.
So you've reached this point now, or I see that you did this now. And usually it's like what's the next step, or how else can you enhance this? Or so it's encouraging after the affirmation of a good job.
Yeah, great. I like it. Thanks, Ray. What else? Another example, and we'll go to our last break and come back with wrap things up. Okay, Joy added some in the chat, so around body paragraphs. I like how in the first paragraph of yours, you're asking some prompting questions. That's also really good. So some of the feedback that we're going to be giving may be written, it may be in person, but again, we want to use that sort of prompting language. I am writing a book chapter for a book, and the women who are the editors, let me just tell you, my first draft was crap. And because I haven't written a paper in a real long time, but yet their feedback was amazing. Like everything that they corrected was a question. And like that was my biggest takeaway from their feedback, was like, I like how you give feedback, because none of it was negative. It was like, have you considered this? And what does the literature say about this? And I finished reading that like feeling really hopeful of like, yeah, that was crap, and I think I can answer these questions, right? And so I think that the more that we use questions of like, remember what we learned in chapter 2, unit whatever, think about the sentence structure there. How could you apply that into this context, right? So again, remembering to get them to do the labor some and to look up some of the things that we're trying to teach them. Yeah. All right, so as promised, as Kat said, as a recent grad, the most helpful feedback I ever received was just a question mark top of a paragraph. All right, well, whatever works for you. I think that sometimes if it gets us thinking, and it gets us really reflecting on what it is that we need to do, then that can be effective. All right, so like I said, we're gonna take our 10-minute break, come back at the hour. We're gonna sort of tie everything up in a big bow, and then wrap up our day. All right, take your stretch break, coffee break, and we'll be right back. All right, so we are going to wrap up our workshop. I want to give an opportunity. Was there anybody else that wanted to share about the tool that they created and how you plan to use it in this upcoming semester? I saw some more people wrote some prompts in the chat. Tell me maybe about a process of like, you're going to put this next to your desk, you're going to put this in your I don't know, your evaluation file of how you can use it. Is something like this helpful to you? Anybody else? Somebody else share. All right. So we're going to go into our last reflection, and I like to do this because I think that too often we go to workshops and we learn, but we don't take enough time in the end to like apply it. And so I want to make sure that you have time within our workshop to like make a plan so that you can work that plan. And so what we're going to do now is my favorite 3-2-1 reflection. And so what I want you to do is to write down 3 things that you've learned today, 2 things that you will do differently as a result of what you've learned today, and then 1 immediate action item. And I don't mean like fold laundry. I mean like something that you learned today that you're going to immediately put into action. I dropped into the chat a worksheet. I'm sure many of you have heard of SMART goals. Well, this is a worksheet for SMARTY goals. And so it includes inclusive and equitable at the end of that. And so if you'd like to use that worksheet, then that can help you create at least 1 really detailed goal of how you're going to apply what you learned today. But at a minimum, please do the 3-2-1. We'll do another, few minutes of reflection. And then I'd like to have as many people report out at least their action item as we can before we dismissed. All right, so let's come back together. What I want to do, if you didn't get to your action item, that's okay. You can list one of the things you learned or one of the things that you'll do differently. We do have 30 of us here, so just keep brief summary. You don't have to give a detailed thesis of what it is that you're going to do. And so to kind of keep it easy and flowing for us, I think I'll just go down the list, your alphabetical order on my participant list. So I'll call on you, unmute your mic, say your 1 action item or at least something, and we'll keep moving forward. Adrian, tell us what's your 1 thing.
I guess the main thing I'm going to try to do is just ask more questions, get direct feedback and kind of guide the learner.
Okay, great, thanks. Cookie's next on my list.
Cookie's next. I'm going to do more of the you can do it, or you're on the way, you're started off right.
Okay, all right, thanks, Cookie. All right, Bo, you've got your mic on, you look ready?
I'd say providing more motivation, keep going, don't quit, more like coaching.
Okay, all right. Thanks. Alicia.
Hey, I'm sorry, I'm not quite ready. I'm having some problems opening up the PDF. I just got it open right now. I'm sorry.
It's okay. You don't have to do the PDF today. I just wanted you to do 3-2-1, but I can come back to you.
All right, thank you. Yes.
All right, Allison. Unmute your mic and tell us.
Unmute. The changing from buts to ands, and I like what Ray Scott said about now, the way to use now. So I'm going to incorporate that.
Okay, great. Amy.
Hey, I think I'm going to try to be more intentional with my motivation. I try to be motivational anyway, but I'm not necessarily very intentional about it. I'm going to try to make it more specific to the situation and to the student.
All right, great. Thanks, Amy. Becky.
My idea is kind of related to the normalizing asking for help, because I think sometimes they don't get started because they don't know how to get started. So maybe pointing out, the examples, the rubric, the video, like there's all these resources to help you, and then me, call me.
Yeah, great. I love it. Courtney. Frank, what's your 1 action?
Well, what I'm going to do is when sometimes you ask the class a question and you get an answer, you get a correct answer, I'm going to respond to it and saying that the answer was correct rather than moving on and just assuming the answer was right if you didn't say it was wrong and then move on. just respond to the student, say, that's right.
Okay, all right. Gulia, please tell me how to say your name correctly.
Hey, you actually got it correct.
Okay, great.
Yes. Well, I started typing in the chat, but it made me, this workshop made me think that I need to make a welcome video, a new one, very short, but put the real person behind the online class and let them know that I'm there, I'm a real, and I will encourage communication, and so they feel safe and comfortable to ask questions and motivate them from the start that they can do it and don't just drop out as if they get frustrated.
Great, that's right. We want to humanize all of us as much as possible. I like it. Okay, Jeff. Thank you, Gulia.
Okay, my immediate action is to look more into guided inquiry. I'm very skeptical about that, but I'd like to know more.
Yeah, I think it comes from like the Socratic method, if I'm not mistaken. It's just sort of like the asking of questions. All right, thanks. John.
Yeah, I think for mine, it's going to be more like the affirmations, kind of like what somebody was saying earlier, that positive reinforcement thinking and going from there. And, I mean, there's so many different approaches you can make, but I think that's going to be my first one, my go-to, and then kind of trickle down to the other ones there.
Okay, all right, thanks. Joy.
Yes, I'm thinking for their first paper, developing more of a clear action plan that breaks down those small goals even more. Because I tried to break it so it scaffolds, but I'm not so sure it's as clear to them as it could be in terms of helping them break it down and how they can reach it. So more of that self-efficacy of, okay, I've done this far, I can do it. So I think a clearer breakdown, and I do it especially with their big paper, but I think from paper one, I need to do that even more with them, that it'll help them more.
Okay, great, I like it, thanks. Kat. Oh, you're muted.
I work in the library, so we often have students come in needing help with research, and I think a lot of the times asking more questions to know what they already know about how to research, and in turn also showing them shortcuts or tips and tricks so that they can get skills so that they can rely on those skills as they build their research skills.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I really like that because you're firing up their neurons, you're reminding them they already know, and you're helping them to build on that. I like it. Kelly, you're next. What's your one action item? If you're talking, you're muted. You can come back. Laura, unmute and tell us what your action item is.
My action item is going to be to make my comments more specific. Like, I have no problem with the affirmation part, but particularly with students who do really well. This sounds silly, but I don't have a problem doing it with students who have a lot to correct, but I struggle giving students who may make an A on the assignment, I'm like, good job, do the same thing next time. Well, that doesn't do anything for them. So I need to be more intentional with those students as well.
Great, thank you. Michelle Allison.
I think in our clinical program where skills are building on skills, I really liked your word to say yet, because I think sometimes they feel defeated if they didn't perform it. And I think that is going to really enhance, their abilities to know, well, just not yet, I like that.
Yeah, if you Google Power of Yet, Sesame Street, there is a really cute song by Janelle Monáe, and I have played it for workshops with adults and they love it too, but it actually teaches growth mindset and the power of yet. So I'll find that link and put it in the chat later, but Janelle Monáe,
I love it.
Sesame
Thank you.
Street. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Michelle Grant.
I'm going to change my feedback to make sure that I acknowledge what they have already completed or mastered, and use the word yet more.
Okay, awesome. I just put the link to the video in the chat. All right, thanks, Michelle. Monica.
Hey, I don't really have contact with students in my role, but I do like when you said using the word smart. That really hit me because I say that to my kids, my kids a lot. So I think that's interesting to really focus on the hard work put in instead of using the word smart.
Yeah, somewhere there's an article by Dr. Carol Dweck where she really makes that case of like stop using the word smart. So I'll try to Google that in a second too. Thank you so much. All right, Natalie.
I think what I'm going to do is I want to incorporate where we talked about at the very beginning about having the students express their learning experiences, because I want to start my class off with that at the beginning of the semester, so it can kind of get them in that mindset of self-motivation for the beginning of the class.
Great, thank you. All right, I dropped that link in the chat for around saying smart. Natalie, you just went. Okay, Rachel.
I think more of that guided information so that I thread common concepts consistently through the content. I teach A&P, and so you have to just assume they know it, but I think I need to remind them constantly about the basics.
Okay, all right, great. Ray, is it Ray Scott or Ray? Now that I've been calling you Ray all afternoon.
Oh, it's Ray Scott, but that's okay.
All right, Ray
It's like
Scott.
Jim Ed or Joe Bob.
Pardon me for that. What's your action?
No problem. It's I'm going to build a bank of generic feedback items that I can cut and paste into my online work, because I've been writing things out and it just takes a lot of time when I'd rather spend the feedback time with specifics, so I can get the generic out of the way and then add the line that tones into the or cues into the specific. So I think just writing those down a while ago, I went, you know what, I write these over and over and over again. I could save me some time if I just get a bank in Word that I can pull from and use. It's easy to do it in class. It's easy to do it face to face. It's harder to do it online because you actually have to spend the time to do it. So I think I was doing less. And this way I can give them the generic that's helpful, but then specifically address something quickly after that.
Good, I like it. I'm an engineer, so I'm always about like process and efficiency. Like, so what are the things I do over and over that I can simplify? So that's a great example of that. Rhonda.
I don't have any comment. Thank you though.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Debbie, did you have something you wanted to share?
No, I've just been listening and I really appreciate it. I've had to been off a little bit to catch a few calls, but thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Alicia, are you still with us? Did you have something you want to add?
I am. I like the idea of putting a more human face on what I'm doing, because I work in the library as well. I haven't really thought of how I might do that, but I do like the idea at least.
Okay, great. Thanks. Courtney, are you still with us? You have an action item you want to share? Danny, are you still with us?
I think Courtney may not have a mic. I'm sorry, Danny. Didn't mean to step on you, but Courtney posted some
in the chat. Okay. So Courtney was agreeing with Rachel. I forgot what Rachel's was. Okay, and Kelly, is that the last one?
Oh, I stepped on Danny. I apologize.
Okay, I'm here. One of the things that I found that works even online, and I had a student this past semester, they come into chemistry afraid from the very beginning. So if they do well on that first test and I say something like, great job, I expect an ARB out of you in this class, it pushes them all semester long.
Yeah, I think that adding on to that, you know, really focusing on effort. Like I think that if you really work and do your homework, that you can earn an A or B, right? So you make sure that you add that that effort component to it, because sometimes that can actually kind of like trigger the that smart factor of like, I get an A or B if I'm smart. So again, putting the effort. So I like, again, that you have those high standards. That's fantastic. All right, did I miss anyone? I think I got everyone that wanted. If I miss you, I'm so sorry. Turn your mic on and share or add it in the chat. So before you leave today, I'd love to have you complete an evaluation. I've got to find my link back up here. I dropped it in the chat. It's just a really short, maybe I can copy that. Let's see. Just a short evaluation before you go. And I will share that back with your institution so that they have that information as well. And as you're doing that, I really want to thank you for being present today. I know that, you know, maybe you're still in kind of holiday mode and warming back up, and I'm grateful that you invested your afternoon to spend with me. Don't forget that this is part of a series. And so I'm going to be back with you. Let me find the slide that has that. February 8th, we're going to be talking about bias. And so mark your calendar for those days. The style is going to be similar. The flow is going to be similar. So we'll do 15-minute segments, 10-minute breaks, and try to do as many activities and discussions as we can. When you do the feedback, I would really appreciate anything that you can tell me about the breakout, because I can't be in all places at once. So how I can make that a better experience for you. If people weren't participating, you know, I can kind of reconfigure the way in which we do that group work, because I want to make sure that we're optimizing this delivery for your group moving forward. So again, take just a few minutes before you shift gears and to either happy hour or picking up your kids or whatever it is that you do on a Monday afternoon. And then I'll have some just final thoughts before we go in 30 seconds.
Megan, thank you so much for your time today. It was wonderful. As always, I just learned so much sitting at your feet every time that you present.
You're not sitting at my feet, we were sitting here together.
Metaphorically. Since I'm right below you in my screen, I'll say I'm sitting at your feet.
Okay, okay.
We look forward to having you back in February.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to working with you all again. I'll drop my email in the chat as well. So if you have any questions that I can answer, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you feel like you missed something, then let me know. I'll create a PDF of the slides and share that with Allison so we can get that to the whole group. And again, I just want you to know that, you know, what you all are going through as educators, whether you're in the library or counseling or administrators or staff, is very hard. And I don't know if you get enough credit for the challenges that you're facing in that. And whatever way that you can serve students in this really weird and odd time, I think that it will serve them in unique and powerful ways. And I also want to encourage you to take care of yourself, because that is something that kind of gets pushed to the wayside. And so do what you can to practice any kind of mindfulness and breathing, to be present, because when we are whole, complete individuals, we better serve the people around us. And remember, sticky feedback is best.